Meanwhile, rebel forces backed by Turkey are continuing operations in northern Syria against Kurdish forces. Turkey says the objective is to clear the area of what he calls terrorism. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has met with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara to discuss the fighting, which is threatening to destabilize northern Syria. The U.S. and Turkey support rival groups in the conflict. A Turkish-backed militia has been fighting a Kurdish-led force that Ankara says are terrorists. But the U.S. regards the Syrian Kurds as allies, especially as a bulwark against the power vacuum left by the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Let's cross over to DW correspondent Dorian Jones in Istanbul. Dorian, the Biden administration already has one foot out the door, basically. What's the point of Blinken's visit to Turkey a month before the change of command in the U.S.?
Well, I think a lot of people here in Turkey are asking that question. But having said that, I think Washington are arguing, given the urgency of the situation, this visit is vital to achieve goals of a successful transition to a stable, inclusive Syrian government, and also to address these ongoing clashes between the Turkish-backed forces of the Syrian National Army and the Syrian Democratic Forces, this predominantly Kurdish force that is supported by the United States with military personnel on the ground in the war against the Islamic State. And containing the Islamic State is also another issue that Blinken is here to discuss, given the fact that the Islamic State group notoriously thrives on situations of chaos and a power vacuums. And the concern is that that has to be prevented, that threat. So I think, having said that, though, this will be a bit of an awkward meeting for the Turkish president and Blinken's counterpart, Hakan Fidan, given the fact that the Trump administration is only a matter of weeks from coming to power, and any commitments made by Blinken are only valid for a month or so.
Mm-hmm. Turkey has promised to, quote, never allow any weakness to arise in the fight against ISIS. But some analysts, Dorian, believe that what they're doing in Syria's northeast is doing precisely that. Why is Erdogan willing to take that risk?
Well, Ankara's position, Erdogan's position has always been that you don't fight terrorists with terrorists. And Ankara considers the Syrian Democratic Forces as being affiliated with the Kurdish separatist group, the PKK, which has been fighting the Turkish state for decades and is designated by Washington and the European Union as a terrorist group. And Ankara says that Washington should have nothing to do with such a group. And this poses an existential threat to Turkey as much as the Islamic State. And all of Erdogan's rhetoric is always, we are fighting both the PKK, Kurd and SDF threat and Daesh, the Islamic State. So Ankara says this group support has to end. Ankara is committed to fighting the Islamic State. But Washington argues that the Syrian Democratic Forces are vital to fight the Islamic State, not only in preventing them from seizing the opportunity of this vacuum that possibly exists in Syria, but also you have to be aware that these Syrian forces, Kurdish forces, are looking after Islamic State, thousands of Islamic State prisoners in prisons holding tens of thousands. And if the Turkish forces continue these assaults, the fear is that those prisons will be opened and you'll have a surge of Islamic State militants. And I think that's another key issue on Blinken's agenda here, is that it's vital to contain the Islamic State threat.
How do you expect U.S.-Turkish cooperation on Syria to change once Donald Trump returns to the White House?
Well, I think that is the key priority from Ankara. They believe that they will have a far more understanding presidency. When Trump was previously in power, he was calling for a total withdrawal of U.S. forces to end the presence in Syria. And much of the recent statements by Trump indicates the same thing, that he said the U.S. should have nothing to do with Syria. They should stay out. And I think that Ankara could well be waiting until Trump comes into power with the hope that he will pull out those U.S. forces. And that will remove one last obstacle for Turkey achieving its goal of removing what it says is his threat on the Syrian border.
That's DW correspondent Dorian Jones in Istanbul. Thank you so much. Well, Turkey has given shelter to more than 3 million Syrian refugees, more than any other country. They celebrated the Assad regime's sudden collapse, and thousands have since returned home. But many remain cautious about what to do next and whether to leave behind the lives they built for themselves in Turkey. DW's Julia Hahn reports from the Turkish-Syrian border.
Mahmoud Khalil is making his way back home to Syria. With his wife and their little daughter Nadine, he queues at this border crossing near the Turkish town of Rehanlı. Mahmoud fled Syria 5 years ago. But now he says they can't wait to return.
There's a lot of destruction, but we will rebuild. We don't care about that. What matters is that we got rid of Assad. Our country will be safe for our children and future generations.
Like Mahmoud and his family, thousands of Syrians have rushed to the Turkish border in recent days, eager to return home after many years in exile.
For most Syrians, crossing this border right behind me is a one-way street. They have to give back their residence permit for Turkey, officials here told us, and sign a document saying they are returning voluntarily. And that means they can't just come back. But that's a risk many are willing to take.
Turkish authorities have stepped up efforts to facilitate faster returns, opening border crossings and boosting staff numbers. And President Erdogan said he expects more refugees to leave.
As Syria achieves stability, voluntary, safe, dignified and orderly returns will hopefully increase as well. It's my belief and prayer that the 13-year longing of our Syrian brothers and sisters for their homeland will gradually come to an end.
Erdogan is under domestic political pressure to send back many of the 3 million refugees Turkey welcomed after the Syrian civil war started. Nearly 14 years later, the hospitality has waned, and many Turks, struggling with an economic crisis and high inflation, want the Syrians to return as soon as possible.
They should leave because they're harming our economy. They've made us lose our values and our identity. They're not doing our country any good.
The oppressive regime has been dismantled. This is exactly what they wanted. So I think there is no longer any reason for them to stay here.
We have already shared a lot with them. If they want to stay, they can stay. If they want to go, they can go. But I think they want to return.
31-year-old Mohammed Ali Nassif wants to wait and see how things develop in Syria before making big decisions. He fled Aleppo as a teenager and has since built a new life for himself here in Turkey. A family, a restaurant with 40 employees.
It's not easy for us to leave everything behind. Even if the situation stabilizes, it will be 2 or 3 years before things improve. There are also many Syrian children, like my own, who were born here and know nothing about Syria.
On top of that come the questions over what the new Syria could look like and how it will be governed.
We hope to achieve democracy in Syria, with a civilian government and free, fair elections. We pray to God that the situation in Syria improves, stability returns, and our homeland becomes better than ever. But right now, nothing is clear.
Back at the border crossing, Mahmoud Khalil and his family are finally going to Syria. Suddenly, everything has to move fast as they step into an uncertain future.